Hi, everyone. I'm Tiff O'Connell, and I'd like to welcome you to our October 26, 2022 edition of O'Connell Law's Lunch and Learn, where you get to sit at your own desk or hopefully somewhere more comfortable, eat your lunch, and listen in on a topic we want you to know about. Because we limit this webinar to 30 minutes, please feel free to post any questions that pop up for you in the question and answer section or the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Based on time, we'll get to as many questions as we can. And additionally, please note that I'm going to actually post a link both for my information as well as for our guest information today. So feel free to definitely use that for following as well. So today, I would like to welcome Kate DeBartolo from the Conversation Project as a guest. So the Conversation Project is a public engagement initiative of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. Their goal is both simple and transformative to help everyone talk about their wishes for care through the end of life so that their wishes can be understood and respected. They believe that the place for this to begin is at the kitchen table, not in the intensive care unit, with people who matter most to us before it's too late. So I asked Kate to come and talk with me today because, not surprisingly, it can be really difficult to have these type of conversations about what your wishes are for care through at the end of life, whether it's for you having the conversation or for you helping someone that you love have that conversation. So with that, I would like to welcome Kate. So Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So thank you. So Kate, I'm going to dive right in. So tell us, for those that don't know, please tell us more about the Conversation Project and how it was started.
Yes, so sometimes we joke that it should have been the Conversations Project because we are really actually encouraging multiple conversations to happen here. But this was based on Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Ellen Goodman. So for those of you in the New England area, you may remember Ellen as a columnist at the Boston Globe, but based on her personal experience in caring for her mother and realizing that as her mother's health was declining, but her dementia had grown, they couldn't have conversations about what her mom would want. And Ellen felt that she was faced with, as she would describe, a cascading number of decisions, and she really wished she'd had her mom's voice in her ear, helping her know how to do that. And she spoke with a bunch of friends and colleagues and peers, and there was kind of this shared conversation and experience for those who had had conversations with their people. Their grief was less complex or complicated. Not to say it was like a good death or a hard death, because there was still the grief of the loss of their person. But for people who hadn't talked about it, there were sibling issues. There was a lot of questions of if I did the right thing. And so that kind of encouraged her to start the idea of the Conversation Project. It's as you mentioned, an initiative within the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. We have no preference for the type of care somebody might want to have. Our goal is just that these conversations happen early and often and before a crisis. So we try to help make resources available for individuals to have that and to try to help change some of those cultural norms.
Awesome. And so knowing that, let's actually dive into what types of resources the Conversation Project offers and how people can access those.
Yeah, so all of our guides are free on our website, theconversationproject.org. And they are in English, Spanish, and Chinese. And there's an English kind of audio video template of it as well. You can download them to your computer and fill out the PDF there. You can email it to someone. You could print it out, use a pen. You could just read it a little bit and use some of the prompts for yourself. And we have resources for you to think about your wishes and how to talk about them, how to choose a healthcare proxy or how to be a healthcare proxy if somebody has chosen you for that role, how to talk to the medical team, how to kind of feel that you have the right words to use or kind of some sample scripts. We've got one for caregivers of seriously ill children as well as caregivers of those with Alzheimer's or dementia. And we have a guide that we created with Ariadne Labs, which is based in Boston as well. It's a What Matters to Me workbook. And it doesn't talk about end-of-life issues. It's more for people living with a serious illness to really get into what matters most to you. How can you make a care plan based on that? And that's a great resource, especially if you have somebody in your life who doesn't want to talk about end-of-life issues, but they might be willing to talk about care management. It still gets to a lot of the same questions.
That's wonderful. And so, in fact, one of the things that we've used for years with our clients is your starter guide or your starter kit.
Yep.
And so we've got it both for regular discussions as well as those that are specifically dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's. And I tell you, they are just such invaluable resources to have. So
I'm glad they're helpful.
Thank you. And that's wonderful to know that you don't even have to order the pamphlets anymore. You can, sounds like, just download.
Yeah.
Which is huge. So thank you so much for having those resources. So now I want to dive in and start talking about the types of conversations you're hoping people will have.
Yeah. So rather than getting into really medical and legal scenarios and hypothetical questions, we focus a bit more on your values, what matters most to you, as opposed to what's the matter with you. We know we can't answer every future scenario that might play out, but if the people in your life understand what matters to you, they could help make decisions based on that. So we really encourage people to answer questions with their current body in mind, rather than, well, I don't know if I'm going to get cancer or if some other thing is going to happen. Well, that's good. So what would you want right now, knowing your current health situation? We can continue to have the conversation later if there's a new diagnosis or it's been a decade and we need to bring it back up. And we want people to think about, we offer some questions in our guide where there's no right or wrong answer. We try to keep it open-ended of, what matters most to me through the end of my life is fill in the blanks, or some scale questions. Like when it comes to your care, are you concerned about too much treatment or too little treatment? No right or wrong answer, but some people fall on very different ends of that spectrum. And it gives you a starting point of what you could then talk about. And why is it that you're concerned about that? Or do you want people to do exactly what you said, or what makes them feel more comfortable when the time comes? So really thinking about kind of the role that other people might play, the role you want to play, and what your values are there.
Yeah, so no, thank you. And one of the things I want to get into is definitely some examples. But before we do that, something that I just want to pause at, because there's something that you said that hadn't really quite sunk in with me before so much, is this is something to use through someone's lifetime.
Yes.
Not just towards the end,
Yep.
but during someone's full lifetime, and knowing that the answers are likely going to change
Yes.
as circumstances, as life changes. And so thank you for finally drilling that into my head.
We say, like, anybody over 18 should have chosen a healthcare proxy. The parent isn't the automatic decision maker at that point. So it might be somebody's going away to college or moving to a new state. When you get married, who do you want to have as a decision maker? Sometimes you might have a parent or a spouse that doesn't understand their role. If you have kids, if there's a divorce, if there's a blending of two families, there's a lot of different life points where this could come up, and it actually makes it easier then. So it's not that I'm only bringing it up because I think that you're declining, Mom. It's because this is just what we do as adults, and we continue to update what our wishes are.
Yeah, no, exactly. So thank you for finally drilling that into my head as to how that works. So wonderful. So now, Kate, let's go into, just because I know it helps me, let's talk about some examples of the type of care that people have wanted. I think that could be really helpful to those listening in.
Yeah. So I have a bunch of examples that I'll share from travels and meetings across the country. The first is that people tend to have a differing opinion on the role they want to play. So I think of a woman who I met out in Las Vegas. She was going through our materials and she was like, I don't actually care that much about what happens. I just want my son and daughter to decide. That's the conversation she needs to have with them, because she just wasn't talking about it. They didn't know that she wants them to decide, but that could be her conversation, as opposed to author Katie Butler, who wrote out a very prescriptive letter to her future decision maker of what should happen if she has dementia. And these are exactly the steps that I want you to take. I don't want antibiotics, regardless of what the issue is. I don't want, she was very prescriptive. So thinking about the role you want to play in making those decisions. We often talk about the importance of talking when people say, I want to die at home or I want to be at home. That's a common, I think 70% of people wish to be at home, but it's not always medically, financially, physically feasible. Somebody might live in a 5th floor walk-up, or their medical care gets too complex to manage at home. So really unpacking what that means to someone. And I know for me and my family, my grandmother really cared about being with her cat. That was the most important thing to her. So she was willing to go to a long-term care facility if her cat could come too. And our family was able to focus on finding a place that allowed that. And it went very well. So kind of understanding what is home for someone can be good.
Yeah. And just to kind of interject there, because I know those, especially dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, it's not unusual for them to say, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home, right?
Yeah.
And I've definitely learned that home isn't necessarily a physical space. It's a feeling. Is
it someplace where you can bring home cooked food? Can people visit? Can you put your own artwork up on the walls? Like, what are the things that would be a private room? Like, what is it that is most important about the idea of home?
Yeah, so thank you for that. What about for family interactions?
So that's kind of like thinking about the role of others. I remember a woman in Florida who was saying, I've actually had all these conversations. My husband and I have done it. I know I'm his healthcare proxy. We filled everything out, but I'm his second wife, and he hasn't told his adult children that he chose me. And this could cause World War III. And so I realized it's actually really easy that he can just say, hey, kids, wanted you to know I've been updating my things. Barbara's in charge for health stuff. That we want to be careful of what we sometimes refer to as the seagull syndrome of, maybe the local adult child who's been caring for somebody who has a whole plan in place, and then the sibling from across country swoops in, dumps on the entire plan, and swoops back out. And so really just keeping people in the know about what's going on. If you've chosen a healthcare proxy, tell other people who your proxy is. You don't need to have a whole big conversation with everyone, but I think about my mom was one of 7 kids. And with both of her parents, it was very smooth because it was clear who the healthcare decision maker was going to be, who was going to help with finances. They all just kind of understood their role. And also being sure that the person you want to choose as your proxy is willing to honor what your wishes are. It doesn't always have to be a spouse or the oldest adult child. It can be who you think is really going to honor what mattered most to you. There was a woman we met in Hawaii who tried to talk to her husband, who said, oh no, I could never do that. I'll sit by your side for 20 years in a vegetative state. Like, I can't make these choices. She asked her son, who said, got it, mom. You don't want any intervention ever. I'll never let them hook you up to a machine. You're good to go. And she was like, that's not what I said. Her second daughter cried the entire time and couldn't handle the conversation. And so her 4th choice was her youngest daughter, who really listened to what she wanted and said, okay, I understand, depending on your prognosis, you'd be willing to try certain interventions, but not much more. So really just finding who is somebody that you think can honor what you want is important. And trying to get down to what is it that you want them to know. So I have a colleague who, when she's had this conversation with her husband, she has it almost down to one sentence of, if something unexpected were to occur and you have to make choices, if I can emotionally and socially help parent our children, I'm in. I don't mind if I'm going to have physical limitations. If I can talk to them, understand what's going on in their day, help them deal with friend issues. But so I would want you to do everything you can. But if I'm not going to be able to communicate with them in that way, I don't need you to take extreme measures. But he has this one sentence that really frames every future decision that he might have to make. So they're not getting into feeding tubes, CPR. It's not that level. It's more, it depends on what the situation is. I trust you. This is my choice, and I trust you to be my voice in the moment. And this is what I need you to know about that.
Fantastic. And so now, something that I just want to dive into a little bit more is, that we say picking your helpers, right? You got
Mhm.
financial helpers if you're dealing with power of attorney, will, trust, that type of stuff. But
Yeah.
for this is healthcare helper who's going to step in to make the health decisions for you, right?
Yeah.
And something that I really appreciate is that, because we hear it too all the time as estate planning attorneys, it's like, oh, I'm just going to choose, I can't figure it out, so I'm going to choose my oldest child, then I'll be the next, and then it's the next. It's like, okay, I get why you're doing that, because it's a hard
Mhm.
decision. But again, just to reemphasize what you were talking about, it's whoever would be really the best one in that role, right?
And
But
what we've heard, some examples, or somebody's like, I don't want my spouse to be in that position. I want them to be able to sit with me and provide comfort. And I have a cousin who I really trust to be in the position of making the healthcare decisions. Or there was a younger adult who said, oh, I had always assumed it would be my mom, but I now realize if something happens to me, like this is going to be tragic. It's a tragedy. It would be unexpected. And what a terrible position to put her in while she's also grieving me in that moment. So I'm going to pick my best friend or, this other person to play that role, so my mom doesn't have to carry that. So there's different reasons why you might choose someone. And sometimes it can be hard to find out who somebody wants. Like there are some people who might not feel, even if you prepared, you want to engage them. There was a woman we met whose husband just did not want to talk about this. She said that he was like Eeyore. He was just kind of like melancholy, didn't want to talk about it. And she flipped the conversation. Rather than let's sit down and talk about this forever, she said, I want to be a little bit prepared. Is it correct to assume that you would want me to make decisions for you? So it became a yes, no question. And then he's like, yeah, I do. And then this is what I think you would want. Like, this is how I'm planning to make decisions. Does that sound right? I was like, yeah, but here's one little tweak. But it was a much faster conversation that gave her relief to be like, I know now I've been able to talk about it a little bit or confirm what I would do is what he would want, but it wasn't super formal. And I think that's a really important thing to notice, that this doesn't all necessarily happen in one sit down. The whole family has to sit around. It might be lots of little bits where you saw a movie and everybody was watching the series finale of This Is Us, and they had a conversation. What would you want in that case, mom? Or I'm going to send an email to people ahead of time of what I want, so that we've kind of started the conversation. But one reason that we think it's so important to talk about this, and why our emphasis is on talking, is that while I don't want to deny the value and the importance of the legal documents or the medical documents, it doesn't do much good if that document is sitting in a filing cabinet and you didn't tell anybody about it. So in the case of somebody being like, well, I'll pick my oldest kid, does your oldest kid know that you chose them? Do they know what you would want? So I think it really goes nicely together that you can document your wishes and be sure that you've talked to people about it.
yeah, and thank you for saying that, because yes, having those documents are crucial, because the last thing we want to have to do is help a family go through the court system to get guardianship over someone.
Yes.
Because they didn't do any of the required legal documents. But
Right.
the legal documents are a foundation. They're there so that people can actually act, but
Yes.
it doesn't replace these conversations.
Yeah.
And to me, getting the legal stuff done is crucial, but just as important is talking about what you'd want and not want.
And I think medical, our focus here is on the medical choices, not on some of the other components that you might do in estate planning. But we hear from a lot of clinicians that they would rather have a family who comes in on the same page, even if they can't find the document in that exact moment. If there's not a lot of infighting or confusion, that's what's really helpful in the moment. And that people have talked about it regularly. I think it was my mother-in-law was saying, oh yeah, I filled out that form 13 years ago when I had shoulder surgery. I'm sure my doctor still has it on file. And I was thinking, I'm sure they don't have it on file. I'm sure some of your wishes might have changed. Like, we should talk about it more rather than only depending on a document. Let's kind of converse about it.
Yeah, exactly. So this is not a one and done. This is a continued conversation. And for us on the legal end, it's updating things every so often to make sure it still makes sense. So thank you for really diving into that. And also for us, something that's really important to me is just those family dynamics. Because I've seen things go sideways way too many times just because people have not had the conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And so something that I really encourage is, having a family meeting for whoever is involved, but also for those that might not be involved, making sure they know while the waters are calm why you've made certain decisions.
Yeah.
Because nothing like saying, like, if I'm and please, I'd love to hear what you guys have from your perspective on it. But for us, it's like, okay, you've told your healthcare agent that you'd want XYZ or not. But if the rest of the family doesn't have that understanding, whoa, is that putting that person in a weird spot? Because they know, but no one else knows.
I think that when speaking about dynamics, there's often also this fear of bringing it up. Like everybody's nervous to bring it up. I don't want to offend somebody that I think that something's going to be going wrong, or I don't want to upset my children. And to frame this around honor and respect. And for us, this actually isn't so much about end of life. It is, how do you want to live your life through the end? With whatever time we have left, what matters to you? How can we focus on that? And so I think that we have some icebreaker prompts in our guide, and hopefully that can help with it. With family dynamics, it gets back to this idea of how to try to help avoid the complex or complicated grief that people might have, especially if they're not getting along with other people. That's what we hear so often, is like conflict between the siblings or between a parent and or just confusion of whether or not I did the right thing. And we know that depression rates are a lot less for people 6 months after the loss of a loved one if they've had these conversations. I also think it's important, whether it's around a case of dementia or in general, that we really focus on not what we would want in the situation, but on what this person would want. How do we keep mom at the center of this and think about what she would want here is a really important thing. And we all might have different ways of how we would want to be approached about this topic. So I've seen a woman in Akron, Ohio, who made the desserts for her family every Thanksgiving. And she held them hostage and said, no pumpkin pie till you tell me how you want to die. And made everybody in the family like unexpectedly go around and talk about what their wishes were. And that was like funny and appropriate in her household. And that would not fly in other households at all. Maybe for somebody else, it's, I need to send an email ahead of time, or I want to prepare somebody that I'd like to talk to you about this, or we can't actually even talk about it live. I need to do this all via email and you can ask me questions, but it's too hard to get together that way. So really thinking about, if you're trying to bring this up with someone, how do they want to be approached, not how it would just work for you. And that so much, I probably should have opened with this, but so much of these conversations is about listening and not talking about what you would want or what your concerns are for the person. We've gotten testimonials from people who say, my grandparents are in a tough situation where they live, they won't move out, they are starting to have dementia. I keep telling them what I'm concerned about. And then I used your guides and I went through and instead I asked them a few questions and just listened. And based on what they said, was able to come up with something that now they've agreed that I can be their healthcare proxy. They're going to move. We have a good plan. But to not have this be a situation where you're just talking at someone or telling them what you think they should do, but really be listening to what matters to them.
Yeah, so important. What's the saying? You have 2 ears and 1 mouth?
Yeah, exactly. For a reason.
Exactly. So something that, occurred to me, because, there are going to be folks that they just can't get over the barrier of having a verbal conversation.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they couldn't write down their wishes, right?
Yeah. We have a beautiful poem that somebody wrote for her, like a letter almost to her children. And I can send that to you if you want to include it when you send out recording. But yeah, for some people, it's much easier to start in writing, or to just, even that idea of getting everybody on the same page, especially when people live in different time zones, they may not be nearby, just to say, here's what I want, because then everybody can pull up that same email and you get a little less of the he said, she said, well, she told me this. So really just keeping people up to speed.
Yeah. So would you say though the best is the verbal, if possible?
I think the best is whatever gets somebody quote unquote talking or opening up, or that we're just trying to increase understanding. And I don't want to assume, we've heard there was one group that we talked to, a large Latina family, and the person was like, in my family, it would be so inappropriate for me to have this conversation with one person. The whole family needs to be part of it. This is like a family decision, not just one person's decision. And it's very different in another family where personal autonomy is super important. And so really, again, just thinking of what works, whatever's going to get you starting to talk or bringing up the topic, whatever the lowest barrier to entry is, I would start with that. And then hopefully it's a muscle that we keep working so that we can, read a book or see a movie and be like, oh yeah, when I saw this, it made me realize I wouldn't want that. Or, just little sentences can really help so that you're not just hearing, if I ever get like that, pull the plug or give me the whole enchilada. It's like, well, what do you actually mean by that? Let's start to find out a bit more.
That's huge. So I can't believe we're approaching the end of the webinar time. So before we end though, Kate, one last question for you. What should those that are listening in walk away with after this, and how to stay involved?
I would say that you all have the perfect excuse of like, I was listening to this call and it made me realize I'm not sure what you would want in that situation. So you can use this as an excuse. I hope that people would take a look at our conversation guide, think about somebody that they might, I think it's important to walk the walk. So if you have somebody in mind of like, oh, I really want to talk to an adult parent about this, it's much better if you say, I've done it myself. Here's what I've done, or I want you to know what my wishes are. Could we talk about yours? So modeling that. I think it's always helpful to use stories. You're welcome to share any of the stories that we've done here. If you're trying to engage somebody else about this on their wishes, presenting it, there's always choices. You can be in control. This is not, it's not something that can't be changed later. You can change what your wishes are. We're part of a team. You get a say. Your medical team wants you to have a say. They want to know what matters most to you so they can help make suggestions. And I just think the framing of, we'll figure this out together. You're not on your own. Like we can do this is really helpful. So my main hope would be that you would have the conversation with someone in your life and help share this concept with your sphere of influence to really just help normalize this with the people in your life, so that folks are doing this. That we have this idea of it's always too soon, or it always seems too soon until it's too late. And the more we can normalize with this for people in early adulthood, that it's a standard part of being an adult, that's going to make it a lot easier for folks as we go.
That's great. And then if the Conversation Project is okay with it, we're going to put this up on our YouTube page. Great. So that way, folks listening in, you can provide a copy of the link for this, and maybe that could be a conversation starter as well.
Right.
And Kate, for those that are listening versus being able to actually see the chat, what is the Conversation Project's website in case they want to go check that out?
Yes, it is theconversationproject.org.
Excellent. And so if you forget that website name, just remember Conversation Project, Google it, and I know it pops up right at the top.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Kate, thank you so much for coming and talking with us today. Thank you as well to all those listening in. Please watch for future email announcements on upcoming lunchtime webinars. Our next scheduled lunchtime webinar is on November 30th, 2022 at noon. I look forward to reconnecting then. I hope you all have a good rest of the week. And as always, wishing you all health and peace. Kate, thank you.
Thank you.